Hey. Hello, and welcome back to Night Shift with Andrea Up Late. I'm joined tonight, as always, by my trusty sidekick, Brian Sanders. How you doing, Brian?
I'm good.
I did something weird with my camera. Now I can't. I talked to them for a moment.
Okay. Well, we will be covering a case tonight that will take us back to 1993. Right?
Yep.
Yes.
So Night Shift is a true crime podcast. We air live on YouTube every Tuesday, sometime in the hour of 8 o'clock Eastern, and kind of go from there. And so we are always engaged with the chat. So if you are listening as an audio listener on iTunes or Spotify or anything like that, you may hear us engage with somebody who's writing in on the chats. Again, that's free. So you just have a YouTube account and you can ask questions about the case we're talking about, talk amongst yourselves, whatever it is that you want to do. And so usually toward the end of the show, once we wrap up whatever the case is, then we kind of really engage with our friends in the chats there. But otherwise, again, this is a true crime podcast. So just keep that in mind when you're taking a listen. But I think that you know that or else you wouldn't be here. So so for those of you that don't know, Brian Sanders is a retired homicide lieutenant. So that adds a ton of expertise when we talk about a lot of these cases. And we tend to highlight unsolved or unresolved. Not always, but that tends to be, I think, a big chunk of what we cover here on Night Shift. Would you say so?
Yes.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Awesome. So if you are a return listener here, then you know that we often cover pop culture from the year of the time that the crime took place that we're talking about. Just mainly, it started out just to give a little levity, but also because it really does, I think, take us back, especially some of these cases from more than a decade ago. Technology has advanced so exponentially. So many things are different, and I think police work is done differently. Investigations are done differently. People can't get away with certain things the way they used to because of technology increasing. So when we talk about the pop culture and we kind of joke about movies and songs at the time, I think it really kind of puts us back in that year and kind of makes us remember what life was like back then. If you're a listener that happened to be alive back then, I think that they're getting younger and younger, or I'm just getting older and older. It's one or the other. Yeah. Or both. So Brian Sanders is our pop culture connoisseur here. Is that right?
Yeah, yes, so? It is. It is important for some people to fully get what 1993 was like. Mm-hmm. And there was a guy named Michael Jordan who played basketball. Some people have heard of him.
What about him?
Some people have heard of this basketball player named Michael Jordan.
What about him?
And in 1993, he started playing baseball.
Yeah, he did.
He played minor league baseball for a team called the Birmingham Barons.
Sure did.
He did it for 1 year, and then he went back to the Bulls.
I'm convinced he can do whatever he wants to do.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think he was good. Mm-hmm. I mean, to be able to do that. Bo Jackson, I guess, was the other person that did that. Football and baseball. Oh, but TV show that was big then was some show called Boy Meets World.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Did you watch that ever?
No.
It might have hit you at a weird... I'm significantly younger than you, so I think that it probably hit you at like a different point in your life that you didn't. Actually, it wasn't. That was a cute show.
I wasn't. Yeah, when that came out, I wasn't. I really
that was
wasn't
93, you said?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I was, a little bit of an older type of teenager. So I never saw it, but I've always heard people make references to it.
Okay. What's up?
So John Grisham's The Client was like one of the
it's good.
big selling books. Yeah, which I would probably say a lot of that type of fiction started kind of explaining how courtrooms work, and we're going to get into some of that talking about this case. Gas was $1.11.
Okay.
And the GMC Typhoon was some random vehicle that I ran across that I've never heard of.
The Typhoon?
Yeah. Yeah.
If you're in the chats, remind me of what the Typhoon is.
I think Bosco would probably chime in right about now and tell us about the stats on it. But I think it was only made for like 2 years. But it cost $29,000 back.
Wow.
Which is a lot. Unforgiven was Best Picture of the year. It's a Clint Eastwood movie.
Yes.
For all the wrestling fans, Vince McMahon was charged in a steroid case. distributing steroids and was found not
Not
guilty.
Not a fan.
Yeah, found not guilty in 1994. Mighty Morphin Power Rangers was huge. It was a big toy. Can you name all of those Power Rangers?
Well, I have a niece who was right at the age that when that was coming around, she was a big fan. So I can name them by color, not by name.
So you don't know that. I'm going to name them for you. Joey, Donnie, Jonathan, Jordan, and Dan.
Why are you doing that? In fact, no, let me give you trivia.
Okay.
I just saw today, and I was actually going to send this to you, that on this day in 1988, New Kids on the Block released the album Hangin' Tough.
Okay. Well, good. So in 93, but technology was still, I mean, we were not walking around with cell phone. Well,
I wasn't yet. I'm sure that people were starting to, but yeah, that was minimal, I think.
And maybe some close, what do they call it? Closed circuit, security camera systems and stuff, but
only for businesses, really.
Yeah.
Not even for, I think, I think mid to late 90s is when that really started increasing for convenience stores and electronic stores and things like that, mainly.
Yeah. Databases were used at the time in law enforcement, were not anywhere close to the way we can connect dots and do geographic profiles and things like that when it gets into investigation. So for everybody listening who gets frustrated when they hear some stuff in these cases, they do have to remember what year it was. We're talking about 1993.
We're going to be talking about 1993. Exactly. Thank you for all that, Brian. So a couple of other things to keep note of, and we've talked about this stuff before, but the Human Genome Project started in 1990. And then in 1996 were some bigger leaps and bounds in terms of advances in DNA and genetics technology. And so those things are significant in the case that we're going to be talking about tonight. In fact, I was a bit, I didn't get around to throwing pictures on here to show you guys on the live stream, excuse me, but I'm sure that it won't be too tough at some point to get Brian talking a little bit. And when he does, then I'll throw some on there. Real quick before we get started, Bosco, do you know what the GMC Typhoon is? Evidently, it was produced in 1993, a vehicle that was $29,000. I'll let you get back to me on that one. I say that like he's going to talk right back to me or something.
Like he's going to call in.
Yeah. All right. We'll do a call-in show one time soon, actually.
Yeah.
That should be good. Okay, guys. Listen up. This case is super horrible. Some would say that it's solved and just not really, I don't know, fully wrapped up in a little bow. And some would say that it remains unresolved to this day. So let's get into it, and you can tell us what you think. Okay, we're going to be talking about a young woman named Cathy Jo Bohlken. All right. We also had, it's a different case out in California, but we have covered, I think I might have covered her twice now, but Sherry Joe, and her Sherry started with a C. So to look at the names, like some, just go on and forgive me in advance if I want to switching names up here. But Cathy Jo Bohlken, Cathy was born in Cedar Rapids, Iowa on April 14th, 1971. She was raised by her parents, Dean and Karen Cox, and alongside her two brothers and two sisters. So she went to and graduated from the Monticello Community Schools. Okay, she graduated in 1989. In June of 1990, Cathy married Michael Bohlken, excuse me. They divorced, I believe, in December of 92. But they maintained a very friendly relationship. They were both raising their young son together. So at this time in 1993, Cathy was employed by the Travel and Transport Company in Cedar Rapids. She also worked at her family-owned convenience store, Cardi's, and she was attending community college, Kirkwood Community College. So on Christmas Eve, again of 93, okay, Cathy took her son Michael. Now you're going to hear the word Michael or Mike a lot because Cathy's ex-husband's name is Michael, and then they named their son Michael, like Michael Jr., right? And then she also has a brother named Mike. So I'll try to keep those straight for you guys. But so Cathy on Christmas Eve takes her son Michael who was a little bitty at this time, I believe he was 4, to her family's home for gifts and to eat and to spend the evening together. She gave her mom an electric potato peeler, and she gave her dad some slacks and a shirt. She and Michael drove home around 10:30 that night. Okay, so the next morning at 6 a.m. on Christmas Day, she was slated to open the family's convenience store. So again, the store's name is Cardi's. It still actually is there. It's still present day now. I told you it was family owned, and it's actually a mixture of her 2 parents' names. So Karen and Dean. And so they named it Cardi's. It's Karde. So the rest of her family had gone that day on Christmas Day to Oxford Junction to her grandmother's house, and her son was with his dad. So she's set to work at the store all day. So Karen, her mom, will say that they got home around 6 o'clock that evening and called Kathy to see if she wanted any leftovers. So Kathy wasn't feeling very well, so she declined the food. And then around 10:15 or so, her roommate, Renee, left for the night to go to a party. And she invited Kathy to come, but Kathy, again, was not feeling so great. And she was set to wake up the next morning again and kind of have a Groundhog Day, reopen the store again at 6 a.m. the very next day as well. So the next day, Kathy did not come to work. After a couple of hours, evidently a patron and like a family friend called Kathy's parents to ask why the store was closed. So at around 9:30 that morning, Kathy's father, Dean, drove to her home to see what was going on. So he said that her car was in the driveway. He said that there were footprints leading up to the door and that the door was ajar. He said nothing looked to be in disarray. He didn't necessarily have cause for panic right away. He found the house was pretty quiet, and he followed the hallway down back to her bedroom. This is where he found Kathy, and he called 911. The scene was very, very tragic. When Brian and I have been discussing this leading up to this case, the fact that her father is who found her is what's just so jarring. But she was found face down by her bed. So there was a pillow over the back of her head. Okay. There was, when you remove the pillow, there was actually a plastic bag over her head, and it was duct taped on. She had her wrists bound back behind her with duct tape. Other parts of her body that weren't specified on public reports were bound. They did say that she had, quote, yards of duct tape on her. She was nude from the waist down, and she had been stabbed approximately 54 times in her chest, head, and neck. And again, nothing really appeared to have been a struggle in the home. We talk about sometimes things like, investigators get there and drawers are out or lamps are knocked over or whatnot. And that didn't seem to be the case here. So immediately police got to work. Jones County Sheriff's Office, the Iowa Division of Criminal Investigation, the Monticello Police Department, all kind of began this investigation. At this time, you guys, the population in Monticello was 3,523. So it was a very small town, and there had not been a murder there since 1974. So almost 20 years prior since they'd had a murder. And we can speak on that briefly. Actually, Brian, you called, did you call Monticello or Jones County?
Yeah, I called Monticello.
Okay.
Just trying to get some general information. But you got to remember, too, I mean, that's most of their staff probably, some of them may not have even been born.
Oh, for sure.
So,
well, I mean, even just to talk to the point where often on these cases we talk about, because it is a small town. And as time went on, there were whispers and, thoughts of corruption or thoughts of all kinds of things. We don't have a clear-cut answer as to what did happen, but sometimes, instead of all those things, we've talked about it often it's just ineptness or inexperience. And this police department to this day remains very, very small. Is that correct?
Yes. 7 sworn officers. So they have basically 1 chief and 7 patrol officers, or 6 patrol officers. So oftentimes,
very small department.
Yeah. So when people are looking at something like that, when a murder or any type of crime scene that's still kind of unknown, and you start bringing in resources.
Sure.
But yes, I was just trying to get an idea of their department and size and that sort of thing.
So that's just important to keep in mind as we talk about like the initial investigation and as time goes on. Excuse me, guys, I'm coming off a cold or something. So police quickly obtained dozens of witness statements early on. Just within not very long at all, they obtained blood samples from 3 individuals that they said at the time were primary suspects. This is very interesting to me. I will tell you that we plan to potentially try to FOIA some documents or just see what they will willingly just kind of hand over. We're waiting on a call back from them, because this case, I will tell you, this was a listener recommended case. So there's 2 or 3 of you right now in line in my brain for cases that you've recommended. So don't think I forgot about any of you, but this one intrigued me. And so we've been studying up. And so in saying that, when they take the blood from these 3 individuals that were unnamed, they still haven't ever named these suspects. There's nothing you can find, by the way. And this isn't in the vein of, do you remember with like Delphi? We talk about the fact that it was so important that the investigators were so tight-lipped with the public, and the public was a little frustrated as the years went by because they didn't hear any details and they really wanted to know what happened to these little girls, you know. In this case, it's not even so much like that. It's just not like, you know, there's one other, the trail went cold is a podcast that I like to listen to. They covered one episode of this that was like 58 minutes long, and that's it. Like, I can't even find another podcast episode on this case at all. I keep running into the same. Finally, I ordered a subscription to these old newspapers online that you can get. And I got most of my information from just dozens of pages of newspaper articles, you know, from the time that this took place and all of their court reporting and things like that about it. But so this case is not well known at all, and nationally anyway, I would say. So like I said, pretty soon after her death, the blood samples were obtained by these 3 unnamed individuals. Again, they called them primary suspects. Now, their blood samples were to be compared to semen that they found inside Kathy's body. Okay, so that's the evidence that they collected from her. So none of the samples, though, matched what they had from Kathy. Okay, so these individuals have never been named. Okay, which intrigues me as well. Unless they just use the word prime suspects because of, like what we said, not being super experienced in murder investigations, and maybe kind of just semantics, throwing words around like, you know, we're really interested in these individuals, but it just made it sound a bit more straightforward than that.
Sometimes I think journalists will say, is that what you're saying?
This is also true.
You know, journalists may, okay, let me back up. Journalists get a lot of their information from search warrants.
Right.
So a search warrant is written and executed, and then the copies are returned to the clerk's office. News reporters will go to the clerk's office and pull the actual copies of search warrants, and then be able to read the probable cause or what you hear detectives or officers say, PC.
Right.
And so they can read that sometimes and then say 3 primary suspects.
Sure.
When really that potentially could just be 3 people that
they want to talk to first.
Some would say like a person of interest or something.
Gotcha.
Yeah, to rule somebody out.
So the autopsy was performed. So those 3 were tested and nothing happened of it. Nothing came of it. And so we're just going to forget that part. Okay. The autopsy was performed by Dr. Peter Stevens. He said that he actually says this. I'm not sure if I've heard a medical examiner say this, but he said he quit counting the stab wounds when he got to 54. He stated that some of the chest wounds actually went clear through to her back, and that he estimated that the knife had been plunged into her head around 10 times. He said that the knife would have been approximately 6.5 inches long and up to 1.25 inches wide. Okay. So that's a pretty significant size blade. As the months went by, local businesses started kind of chiming in and raising money, and Kathy's parents hired a couple of different private investigators to assist with the investigation. There was an article in the Muscatine Journal dated December 26, 1994. And this states that DNA had been run at this point on 30 people. Okay, so that was 1 year later. They had run DNA samples or compared samples to approximately 30 people. So now everything is kind of starting to cool off. The family did hire I've read a couple different sources that she kind of like inserted herself, and I've also read that they hired her. So I can't say for sure which is true, but that they hired a psychic at one point. This lady actually was nationally known at the time. She was a part of the show Sightings. So if you can remember back in the mid-90s, there was that show that I think started on Fox. A lot of alien talk, but also like unsolved stuff as well. It kind of covered a lot of different stuff. And so she was a part of that TV show. And in fact, you can go back, and Kathy's case is briefly covered on Sightings season 3, episode 25. I found that myself, and that aired in May of 1995. So you can't really find it streaming anywhere as an old show. But if you go to YouTube and literally type in Sightings season 3, episode 25, it'll take you back. And like I said, this was aired though in May of 95. So they, it's sad. It's really tough to watch because it was very soon after this took place. And it's just tough. You're seeing the hope in the family's eyes and stuff like that as they're talking, but that clip does still exist. Anyway, the psychic had some things we can talk about later on, and then eventually kind of went about her way. So in July of 1995, a man named Travis Jameson was contacted by police. He was asked to submit a blood sample, and all reports say that he easily volunteered this. The police said they'd get back to him in a couple of weeks. So when they spoke to him, they tried to narrow down his timeline the night of Kathy's murder. Okay. Travis was an acquaintance of Kathy's younger brother, Michael. Sources differ in how close they were as friends. Either way, they were acquaintances. They have ridden here and there together before. All accounts point to the fact that Travis had been with Michael and at Kathy's home at some point to help her babysit her little boy. So Travis's memory was a little bit fuzzy from that night of Christmas Eve of 1993 because he'd been drinking. He'd been out partying that night, but he did tell them what he knew. He would have only been 16 years old, you guys, at the time of Kathy's murder. Okay, so when they approach him in 95, he's 18 years old. So he would have been 16 when she died. So the night of when Kathy passed away, there was a couple of different parties going on. If you remember, her roommate left to go to a party. And so her brother and Travis, the guy that we're talking about now, also went to a different Christmas party. So they went to a place about 10 miles outside of Monticello. Travis drove Mike home around 10 p.m. He says that they left the party around 10 p.m. They both corroborated this, and Travis drove Mike home. It sounds like Travis had asked to go say hey to Kathy. And at first they were going to, they considered it, but she wasn't feeling well. It was getting late. And so Mike decided, let's not do it. Travis did drive, though, by her house on the way to take Mike home. And Mike will say that he noticed the lights on in her house. So Travis, per his account, dropped Mike off at, 10:15 at Mike's house. Okay. Travis says that he drove back to the party. So his account is that he drops Mike off, he drives back to the party, hangs out for a while, and eventually passes out on the couch at 1 a.m. and spent the night there. Okay. So there's one witness named Kimberly Davis who said that she saw Travis leave the party and she didn't see him again, and she left at 2. So when she was a witness for the prosecution saying, no, like he doesn't have a solid alibi of being passed out on the couch. I saw him leave and he never came back. But Travis's cousin, Brett Placid, went to bed around 1 a.m. and he says that he did see Travis passed out on a couch. And we've talked about this. This is it, at this point now, it's been a couple of years. And you're relying on the memory of late teenagers after having been at a party, drinking. I think we take these witness statements kind of with a grain of salt, especially since we have one of each that conflict each other, would you say?
Yeah.
And look, I don't know if Travis was at that house that night or not, but it's just difficult to go off of either one of those statements as concrete. I think it's just something to add to put in with the case, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's especially back then, but when you've got people who are trying to recall things, you've got, I say that, but you've got to be able to try to prove it. And back then it would have been through like receipts if you went somewhere and purchased something, if somebody witnessed you there, or if 2 or 3 people say you're at a party. You know, is everybody kind of recalling the party the exact same way or similar way? You know, not like it's a rehearsed story or anything like that. And then people are getting into like exact times. That sometimes is a little bit like, well,
can be a little tough. Yeah, precisely. So finally, in January, Travis was told that his blood was a match to the DNA of the semen found in Kathy's body. Okay, so the sources say that his reaction was one of shock. He started to cry. He immediately rolled up his sleeve to offer more blood for them to take to redo it. He said they had to be wrong. This didn't make any sense. Now, do you find when you're interviewing suspects or, you know, talking about things of this nature, that if you, let's say you were to say that about the DNA, you know, in your history, what would you say is generally the reaction if the person potentially was guilty? Would they often offer up more samples?
Well, I would say in the past, they have not. And oftentimes it's almost like sometimes their speech patterns will slow down a little bit because their brain starts calculating and they're trying to either remember how they left their DNA on scene or how that test is. Usually when someone's volunteering, hey, let me take a lie detector test or take my DNA, do this. Usually they're trying to clear themselves. I mean, it's not 100%. It's not perfect science, but the art of it is very similar to that often people aren't wanting to necessarily volunteer stuff up like that.
I gotcha. And I'm not saying that makes him innocent, but it's always interesting to kind of just see this pattern.
Yeah.
So, let's see where we are. So in February of 96, Travis actually went to trial for first-degree murder. Excuse me, guys. I do apologize. So I'm going to read to you what this says. So this is from the Gazette, okay, the Iowa City Gazette. And this was an article in February 8th of 1996. And it says, the documents on file in the Anamosa courthouse show law enforcement officials obtained a search warrant January 31st to search the 1982 GMC pickup they believe Jameson was driving the night of Bohlken's murder. A utility knife and a steering wheel with a, quote, red-brown stain. So, you guys, this was February of 96, okay? Kathy was murdered in December of 1993, okay? So, this is 2 years later. So, they say that they found a utility knife in Jameson's truck, this Travis guy, right? They found a, quote, red-brown stain. These were removed from the truck along with a blanket-style seat cover, a vinyl seat cover with duct tape attached, some debris from the driver's side seat belt. This is all according to the search warrant affidavit submitted by Ken Sandy, who was a special agent with the Iowa Division of Criminal Investigation. The court documents do not say whether authorities believe the utility knife may have been used in the murder. The knife was not described, but a local hardware store employee said utility knives generally have a 1-inch angled blade with a rounded handle. And I think that we've all seen those. Box cutter, right? So whether he did it or he didn't do it, this is likely not the knife that committed the murder. But these are the things that they obtained from his truck per the search warrant affidavit. And so this would have been in his trial in 96 that they had this stuff on hand. So they have what they call the red-brown stain on hand. Keep that in mind. Put that back here in the back of your brains, guys. So they did that. Okay, here we are. So this is where when we were talking about like Genome Project and then later in 96, how DNA testing technology advanced greatly, we weren't there yet. Okay, we hadn't gotten there yet. It was getting there. Weren't there yet. So they did 5 backup tests after the original testing. And of these, 3 tests produced what they call nothing. So they got no kind of result, nothing valid, nothing that they could use as a tool. The other 2 were too faint to be reliable. So it produced something, but they couldn't rely on it. This happens. Just because you get a ding doesn't mean it's a match. Okay, guys? So a place called Cellmark Labs is who this DNA had been sent to. This is who had the semen from Kathy's body and who was then cross-matching these other samples. So they'd use something called a cocktail probe. So Cellmark at this time was the only lab using this technology in the country. All right. So a cocktail probe is a mixture of blood and semen that they use. But this is all during trial that this stuff is coming out, kind of the ins and outs of it. Molecular geneticist Randall Libby called the results questionable, and he said this isn't exactly one he would feel comfortable relying on. Now, we all know that the prosecution's going to have their experts and the defense is going to have their experts, and you would like to think they're all going to say the same thing since it's science, but there is some subjectivity to this, and then there is a whole, it's not just we have the sample and then we have the test. There's multiple people involved in that entire process, and then all the handling of it and the testing of it and the interpretation of the results can actually be a little bit subjective. Okay. So I'm going to read to you also. This would have been from a different newspaper at the time, and this would have been from like a court reporter reporting on this. In this article, and this article says Friday's first witness was former Cellmark employee Julie Kidd, now a forensic examiner for the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Kidd gave jurors basic explanation of DNA and how the tests are done. She also showed jurors original Cellmark 1994 test results in the Bohlken case. So the jurors were able to look at the pictures. It can sometimes look like if you've seen an EKG strip with a heart rhythm, it's similar to that. You see like arrows, and then when you combine the two, if you're just listening, I'm using my hands just to show a lot of this, but you want to see like dings at the same spot when you're seeing some of these matches. But I think that she tried to kind of like elementary school it for the jurors so they would kind of just fully understand the meat and potatoes of what the results were and what we, would have been hoping to find there, right? So she showed the jurors that the test found no match with the 3 men that we spoke of earlier whose blood had been tested by Cellmark. So this woman, Julie Kidd, left the company, Cellmark, in late 1994 before these tests were run on a blood sample that Travis Jameson submitted in 95. Okay. So it says Robert's questions of Kidd attempted to cast doubt on the quality of the DNA samples used. So this would have been the defense, okay? Kidd admitted that the samples received from the victim contained a lot of Bohlken's own DNA. Some degraded, but only a very, very small amount of male DNA was detected. She also confirmed that when the first DNA tests were done in the case in April of 94, Cellmark was not an accredited lab at that time. Now, keep in mind, that doesn't mean that they didn't do things right, but they had not gotten an accreditation yet, and they were the only ones doing this type of testing. They gained its accreditation a few months later. Kidd also confirmed that the FBI's lab does not use the cocktail probe technology in its DNA testing. Okay, so take that for what you will, but that was some of the testimony during the trial there. So we have, keep in mind though, when we think about this, what was going on at this time, y'all? This was 96. So OJ's trial had just wrapped up. It was from, I believe, February to October of 95. It was like 8 or 9 months long in 1995. So and he was acquitted, and he had DNA that would, could have made its own human out of that DNA. I mean, it was so strong that that genetic evidence there in the OJ case, and he was acquitted. So keep in mind, I think that that's some of the complaints when people get frustrated with this case, is that the jurors were confused. This was new technology to the average human being. The average citizen wasn't sitting around talking about, this is pre-CSI and forensics and all these shows that we have now. We also had in 1996, this is pre that. This would have been pre that because that would have been Christmas time as well. But Jean Bonnet, so we start talking about DNA then too. So this was kind of within the first couple of years that it was really making its way into cases that we knew of and we're hearing of nationally. So the jurors are getting these lessons. Travis's attorney, Mark Roberts, argued that there are not fingerprints, weapons, fingernail scrapings or witnesses that could place him there. His parents. Now, this is interesting. This is something I did want to find out, so I was glad to read this in the court documentation. His parents say that they were home when he walked in the door. So they say, if they're being honest, they say that he got home at 6 o'clock that morning and that he was wearing the clothes that he had left in the night before and that he didn't appear to have any blood on him. Okay. The trial, by the way, they did move it over to a different county. They moved it to Lynn County, obviously, to try to not have swayed jurors. Let's see here. You guys know all my notes. So he was acquitted in March of 1996. Now, the jurors cited that they just they couldn't prove him guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. They did feel like the DNA evidence was either not enough to go off of, or that it had been mishandled, because that's kind of how the defense presented it. We will get into that in a little bit, but that was kind of their argument for saying, like, we just couldn't convict based off of what we have. We have no physical evidence. There are no witnesses, and there was no, now some might argue that was physical evidence, but that's if that DNA is accurate. Mm-hmm. So when you're going off of DNA, you often don't go off of just this one source, this one test alone, and that's all they had. And multiple sources I read had geneticists and pathologists that were saying kind of that same thing. Like, yes, we use this, and we could use this to actually snag someone, but we use it in conjunction with other things that we have to build a case. So then in July, 4 months after he was acquitted, Kathy's father, Dean Cox, did file a civil suit for wrongful death against Travis Jameson. It was more, he will say that he wanted Travis to get a chance to say his piece. I think that's what Dean has been recorded as saying. And the reason for this is because during the trial, Travis, as always is the case, right, was advised not to testify, not to get on the stand. For, his defense attorney urged him not to do that. But when you're in a civil suit for a wrongful death case, you have to. Mm-hmm. I didn't know that, but that's mandatory. Mm-hmm. So I think that her family, to not bridge the gap of speculation too much here, but I do think that her family wanted to hear from him, from the horse's mouth, if you will, what he had to say, what his demeanor was going to be about it. And they knew who he was, and it was a small town. Remember that. So either way, her dad will say that this was for her son, that they did this, more of just some kind of closure for him as he got older, that he would have some kind of an answer. And Travis Jameson was found guilty in the wrongful death civil suit. And Kathy's family was awarded, I would say, but, basically his payment was going to be in the millions. I think it was 5 or 6 punitive damages amongst, some other things. He didn't have any money. They, I think that they started to maybe garnish some wages initially, but he didn't have money for that. I will say Travis Jameson maintained his innocence always. He passed away in April of 2022. Travis Jameson did. He was only 44 years old when he died. And so we can get nothing from him at this point. Yeah. But he did say that he maintained his innocence. Like I said, he never admitted to anyone he did this. He never confessed to doing this. And almost 30 years had gone by from the time it happened until he died. So take that for what you will. Another couple little tidbits are, number one, in a civil suit, to be found guilty in wrongful death or of wrongful death in a civil suit. I looked this up because I wasn't really sure what you needed to prove. So the burden lies on, quote, a preponderance of evidence. So essentially it's more likely than not. It's kind of a shade similar to beyond a reasonable doubt, but more likely than not. And they considered the DNA to be the preponderance of evidence needed to grant this guilty verdict. The duct tape they found in his truck, the duct tape that they found with Kathy, as far as I know, has never been linked to Travis. In fact, I've read that it was not. And so that's what I wanted to go back to as well before we start really kind of spitballing here. that when I didn't know anything about the search and seizure of the items within the vehicle when he was arrested, everything that I had read prior just solely talked about the DNA, the semen. So when they find duct tape, which that's pretty common. If you guys remember, like vinyl seat coverings with duct tape in an old beat up truck, that's very common. But they never said like, oh, we ran all this and it's nothing. My assumption is that they ran it because they took it all. They took the blood. They took the, well, I say blood, excuse me. They took a stain that they thought appeared to be blood. The knife, the steering wheel, the seat cover. And obviously time had gone by. But, you know, I don't know. I think it sounds like nothing came of that either. So, you know, something to know is that one of the geneticists will say that when they say they have a tough time relying on the semen and DNA match alone, it's because evidently there had been some degradation in that semen. And I won't get too like in the weeds with genetics and DNA matches and all those kinds of things. And I'm certainly no expert in it, but I guess they said that they found like 12 sperm heads dried when they collected the sample on the swab. And that would then lend them to believe that it had started to deteriorate. They say that you needed to have around what they consider the measurement is a nanogram, and to be a reliable source of DNA and semen at that time with the technology that we had then, you needed to have around 50 nanograms of material within the semen, and they had 25 nanograms. And so then some of the geneticists would argue that this potentially might not have even been like some of the matter that they tested could have been bacteria, any other type of substance, whether, you know, take that for what you will, but it's, you kind of, there doesn't seem to be a big concrete, like, wow, we have this match. It's a big one. There does seem to be some holes in that. What say you? I've kind of got like a running list of kind of pros and cons where I could put him in the guilty or not guilty category, depending on what I'm thinking about.
I mean, I always want to hear a whole lot of evidence. And I don't know, in the past, people have gotten frustrated with me at times because I do push that a little bit, but that is my thing, is like, okay, DNA is great, but if you only have one thing and one sample and that's it, and you don't have other things, and I don't want to get ahead of you, any homicide investigation now, years ago, they probably didn't do this type of approach, but as you investigate and your suspect pool narrows down. Once you find somebody basically in your investigation and they're your suspect, you now work backwards and you actually try to clear them.
Right. Because then if you can't clear them, then you got your guy. Yeah.
Yes. So if the only thing you've got is DNA and it's in this one sample, that's tough. I mean, that to me, that just doesn't feel good. Either way, I'm not saying that he didn't do it, but right now I have
with the information that we have, I will say it would be difficult to convict. And again, not because the guy didn't do it, but just because when you look at what they have, I'm not seeing what is solid enough to do that with. Some will argue, I've heard people say this, I heard it on the one podcast, that some would say that, you know, they think that maybe with advancements in technology today, because maybe it would for sure, or maybe it would be the opposite. I mean, it's just hard to know. I think there are some things though, and this is where we want to spitball a little bit. We've talked about types of murders before. We've talked about types of bad guys before, or what would spur someone to do something, what would cause someone to be enraged, or was it something that was sat back and planned, right? For this, I will say, I don't think, and disagree with me if you want to, I don't think that, let's say he was spurred by her. Let's say that he had come on to Kathy. I think that's kind of a general thought amongst a lot of people, that he had come on to her and she denied his advancements and he snapped. Okay, maybe. I think at that point, if he were to have violent tendencies, which, by the way, I can't find anything in his record about him being violent. I've heard things like he was kind of a piece of crap. Like, he just kind of he dropped out of school early, kind of got into some trouble around town, but more like speeding stuff, drunk driving, those kinds of things. I'm not seeing a lot of like violent criminal activity with him.
Mm-hmm.
So, but if he were to tend toward violence, maybe if that's what happened and he snapped and he stabbed her, okay, maybe I could give you that. But the duct tape and the plastic bag,
mm-hmm.
you've got to get a plastic bag. Like, you've got to get duct tape. Mm-hmm. I don't know that Kathy had that laying around. I just can't imagine that's laying around on the bed or the nightstand. You know what I'm saying? So that would take more thought, I think, ahead of time.
Yeah, and to recreate. So anytime you got an investigation, you have your crime scene, it appears that a murder happens, you've got these items. When you recreate it, like you and I talk about, it's like, okay, were the items from inside the home or did someone bring them?
Right.
If someone brought them, then obviously they're a little...
Like, did she have those types of plastic bags? Were they from her convenience store she worked at? Were they, know?
And why? Why were those items used
mm-hmm.
as opposed to anything else? For a younger person, usually it's more impulsive.
I think that I'm having a tough time with the shoe prints leading to the... Oh, I didn't tell you this. The shoe prints didn't match his or anyone in his family's. Travis's, that is.
Mm-hmm.
And we don't know, sources are not clear as to whether or not they kept those prints or molds of those prints, okay? So, I don't know. There's a lot of things that we've talked about. If that DNA is a match, had they potentially had consensual sex at some point? I mean, I don't know. And then this is something separate. That seems like a stretch, I know. But we really don't know exactly what happened here. I don't know. I just am trying to picture a 16-year-old being able to do that, execute that task, not leave behind hell of evidence. Like, being scratched, being whatever. And I think that you could argue, because I thought about this, like that maybe she had already gone to bed. She wasn't feeling well.
Mm-hmm.
If this was kind of later on, maybe she was already in bed. So whoever did approach her she was already subdued, when they got there. So maybe that's the lack of, things in her fingernails and these kinds of things. But I don't know at 16 that he could complete that. If his parents are being honest, he wasn't bloody. You can't not be bloody with this.
Well, yeah, like we've talked about, there are ways to do things.
Mm-hmm.
Like there is a way to commit that crime and leave there and not have blood on you. However, you're still potentially leaving behind some of your stuff. And I don't want to get into details.
And he was 16. Right. I keep going back to that.
Yeah.
Not that we know that teenagers commit heinous crimes. I mean, go look at the Bever family slaughter. Horrible.
Mm-hmm.
Teenage brothers. They can. But I think that like we will often talk about like the psychology behind things. If that's what happened, if he got so enraged that he snapped and not only just killed someone, but went to this level, doing all these extra steps to make it that much worse, in the next 30 years until he died, you could likely see that something like this would happen again.
Yeah.
Some kind of violence.
Yeah.
I think it would just be unlikely that it didn't happen before or after.
Yeah, I just, I don't know. Obviously, the lead investigators have a lot more, obviously, information than we do as the public. With it being that it went to trial and that sort of thing, there is information in there. I do know of cases, though, where everything hinges on like one piece of evidence.
Uh-huh.
And one of the things that...
While you're talking, I'm going to download. Go ahead.
One of the things that I learned from a really, really good detective, and he would say it so much that we all started saying it on our team, was that this is not a rodeo.
Right.
So often in police work, foot pursuits, chases, you're going after somebody with fugitive warrants. Things start to kind of ramp up. Homicide investigations are the opposite. You move slower. You definitely move you know, in a pace that you can control information coming in and going out. And he would always say that this is not a rodeo. Also, with that mindset, you get one chance to charge murder.
Exactly.
And most of the public knows now about double jeopardy and stuff. I mean, it's been in movies and it's, you know, part of our society. Most people know that. One, you don't ever want to charge the wrong person for any crime, shoplifting, trespassing, whatever. But you get into murder, you definitely don't want to do that. And you want to have a solid case that when it does go to trial, that, you know, you don't end up with a not guilty.
Right.
Because if that person did commit that crime, but they're still found not guilty because of, you know, it did not rise to that level in the jury, you know, did not find that person guilty. Now they can't be charged again. And there are agencies, I'm not saying this one, but there are agencies in my experience and things that I've read, you know, where people get in a hurry and they look and then they say something like that, like, well, we got a fingerprint or we got a shell casing that matched up, you know, boom, we got enough to charge. And it's like, slow down and, you know, start getting your plan together. You want to get in front of somebody. You want to ask them how their DNA is at a crime scene. So without knowing a whole lot more than that, this case, it just, to me, it
doesn't feel complete.
It doesn't. And he could have done that.
Sure.
Without knowing a lot more about his personality.
Yeah, don't get me wrong. I'm not here trying to exonerate the idea of that.
Yeah.
And clearly the jury in the civil trial, you know, felt strongly enough to convict at least the wrongful death count. So I'm not saying that he didn't, but I'm just arguing both points that I don't think that what they had at the time was enough to convict whether or not he did it.
And let me say this, and I've probably said it before. After a trial, detectives can talk to the jurors. And the prosecutors can. And it's incredible feedback. And I know that a jury in one case had explained that they found the person not guilty for the crime, but they said it doesn't necessarily mean in their gut they don't feel like the person didn't commit the crime.
Okay.
It was just that the state did not have enough evidence.
Oh, yeah.
That, you know, it was like one of those things where they, you know, and that's why our judicial system is the way it is. But people get, I think that when it's murder and jurisdictions or departments don't work a lot of murders, or for this city, they had gone decades without working a murder.
Yeah, it'd been 2 decades.
Then you have to have a lot of different resources come in, and it sounds like...
And they did.
Yeah, that they had at least 3 different agencies.
Yeah, weird stuff starts happening. So the chief at the time of one of those agencies, excuse me, Bert Walters, was kind of like really adamant to like really wanting to get this going, saying that he couldn't sleep at night over this kind of thing. And as the listener of our show told me, that when he recommended this case, and he said, you know, whispers and rumors abounded. It's a small town, as you can imagine. The rumor mill went wild. People had big, strong opinions that differed from everyone else. And there was some pushback with the Bert, that chief guy, because of some way he had some civil rights stuff is what they said, and some other stuff. But then he said that the public was kind of like looking at him in this a little bit, some of the public, which is bizarre to me. That's still something I'm trying to figure out. I don't know I can't find any specifics or why in the world anyone started talking about him doing it. So he actually submitted his own DNA to be tested. Side note, he was not a match, but that's very interesting. You don't often have a chief submitting DNA. So there's just a lot of kind of weird moving parts in this as well. I'm trying to see let's see those pictures uploaded, because I would like to show you guys. And you know, now I will say that while I'm looking for this, that Kathy's brother, Kathy's brother, Michael, will say that, Why is this doing this? Okay, well, sorry guys, we won't have pictures tonight. That in the time after Kathy's death, that Travis did kind of say a couple of strange things. Like one time they passed by a jail or a reformatory or something like that, and Travis said something along the lines of, I'll be there the rest of my life. I'm going to be there the rest of my life. And didn't really say anything else about that. One time, her brother did say that Travis said one time, what if the DNA comes back and it's me? And I guess her brother said, like, well, it won't, because it's like, that'll be like who killed her. Yeah. And he's like, well, but what if it's me? So take that two ways. He's guilty and he's freaking out, or he literally didn't know anything about DNA and just worried, like, oh gosh, what if they think it's me or something, right? Like, it's really hard to know. But at the same time, you know, he was in the vicinity. We know he at least was in the vicinity. He drove by her house that night. Whether he ever stopped there or not, we do know he drove by. And we do know that, you know, he had wanted to even go there that night with her brother, but, you know, mentioned going. Yeah. So his parents maintain again that he came home in dry clothes that he had left in. And, you know, I don't know. I don't know. That would be really messy. It would be really hard, too. We talk about that. That's not an easy way for someone to kill someone.
No. And that's, you know, if you've got a controlled crime scene and you start going through, that's when you're looking for any items that are out of place or missing from the home, like we were talking about, like duct tape, plastic bag, or plastic, anything, you know, that's used in the commission of the crime. So, and did they bring it or not? It's tough. Anytime, you know, you have a case that goes to trial, it's a gamble. And a lot of people have expressed over the years how mad they get that a person, you know, is charged with a murder and they plead guilty and then they get, you know, 6 years or 8 years or 10 years for a murder. And then you look at it and you go, okay, that person was charged with the murder. They pled guilty. They're accepting that they did it. And then they get, say, a 10-year sentence. Conversely, they want to take it to trial. And then they could be the killer. It could be, you know, a solid case. And for whatever reason, a jury finds them not guilty. And then they walk out the door. And so it's always one of those things that there usually is talk between the family, the prosecutors, and the detectives or the lead agency on what they're going to do, if they're going to go to trial, if they're willing to take a plea, if that person's defense attorney has said they want to take a plea.
That's I got a picture of Cathy up on the screen right now. I will put, as always, a lot more pictures from the case on Instagram on Andrea Update in the next couple of days. This is, I've got a lot on my phone. I can't seem to get them uploaded right now as we're speaking, but I'll show you more. But this is an example. It's kind of a blurry picture, but it's a picture of Travis Jameson. And that's there when he's on trial the first time in the criminal trial for murder. So then we started talking and had some interesting thoughts that are just worth talking about. Yeah.
Well, the idea, you know, sometimes we kind of gloss over because we talk so much off air, like we talk all the time. But the whole idea of when you bring in other agencies and you start looking at an investigation like this, one of the first things that we always talk about is like, okay, a crime like this doesn't appear to be like an argument that gets out of hand. Right. You know, so, okay, this person went there with the intent to commit this crime in this very specific manner. Okay, well, what else do we have? Are we close to other areas where crimes like that have occurred?
Right.
And then we
and another reason why, you know, we say things like, not that he's for sure innocent. Did something just drop on me? What?
No, I don't know.
Oh.
Sorry.
What it was.
I'm used to agree.
When we talk about, again, not that we know that he's innocent or necessarily even think that, but the fact that he lived 30 more years until his death, and as far as we know, no other events like this occurred. This is a very specific way to murder someone that usually you would see some other violent tendencies, something else, had he done it. That could go either way. But like Brian was just saying, you can start kind of canvassing the area and say, well, did anything kind of like this happen around that area anytime, and around that time or within a couple of decades? And if you look up Cathy Bulan, like I said earlier, unfortunately, not much comes up about her case. Not much at all. You have to search. And I say that it may look like a lot to you. When I look up a lot of these cases, I don't ever have the time to read all of the information that I want to read, because there's usually so much, even on a lesser known case. And on this one, there's really not. But in saying that, sometimes you will see that Michelle Martinko will pop up when you look up Cathy Bulan. Now, Michelle Martinko, I think at this point I've covered that case 3 times, maybe 2-3 times. She is the young blonde girl that was 18, that had gone to the mall in 1979. There was a green car. You guys may remember it. You can go back to Instagram and see, or on YouTube and watch the show if you want. But she was murdered, and she's one that it was 1979 when she was murdered, and it wasn't solved until many years later due to DNA technology advancements, right? She had been found in her car in the mall parking lot, violently stabbed 29 times, 27 times. Yeah, something like that. Face, neck, and chest. So we're seeing a little bit of similarities here in the way that took place, right? A very violent crime targeted to a particular area, a particular age woman. Cathy was 22, if I may remind you. And the guy who did it had a powder coating business, at some point co-owned a truck stop with a buddy, had a wife, had a very normal life outside of that heinous murder, and no one knew he did it. And it went unsolved, like I said, until finally, at some point, they were able to rerun the DNA from the fingernail like scratches that she had scratched him. She fought very violently in that case. And she had scratched him so badly that they were able to take that decades later, run it, and find this guy named Jerry Lynn Burns. And by then he was just an old man, married, and they full on arrested him for this. He is currently on trial, or excuse me, no, he's not. He is currently in prison. I want to make sure I'm telling you the right word, because I want to say Anamosa. What's the city? It's the same thing. Yeah, Anamosa. And the Anamosa Penitentiary. Do you know what that is? That's where this case took place. So when Jameson was being tried, when he had his trial, that was at the Anamosa County Courthouse. That is the prison where Jerry Burns is after murdering Michelle Martinko. Michelle Martinko was murdered in December 19th of 1979. So meaning it would have been 14 years, almost to the day later, that Cathy was murdered in a fairly similar manner. To the day. Like, we're looking at mid-December, end of December deaths. It's worth considering this. So Jerry Burns is currently still in that prison, alive to this day, and there because of Michelle Martinko. So these are things you have to think about. So this is something that is possible, because then again, so that was 1993. So then in 2008, Jerry's wife committed suicide. And then in 2013, so 20 years later, Jerry Burns' cousin, not the same victimology, it was a male, his cousin, went missing in December of 2000, or of the same day that Michelle was murdered, of 2013. So we have 3 December murders, but 2 of which are very, very similar, and it's piqued my interest a little bit. I will tell you that.
Yeah, it
may mean nothing, but it's worth a look.
Yeah, it's one of those things where you'll hear terms like geographical profiling, or whatever the term of the day is. When you do look at a map, Cedar Rapids, where the crime scene was from Martinko, Manchester, where her killer was arrested, and then Monticello. All of them are like 30 minutes to 40 minutes apart.
Yeah, I think
like
it's about 25 miles from Manchester to Monticello.
Yeah.
So from where Jerry Burns lived and raised his family and lived his whole life, to where Kathy.
So often you look for if for example this was something that was connected. Investigators are going to look at what ties would he have to Monticello, or what were the ties to Cedar Rapids? Because usually somebody's got to kind of know the area, be familiar with it, cross paths with someone, especially in that sense, the way it was carried out. And obviously we're not saying that he's a suspect or anything like that. It's just that's an example of when agencies start working together and they do start looking at what are our patterns, what do we have? Do we have any other murders that are very similar in nature to this, right? And back then would be a lot tougher in 93 to do that. Definitely a lot harder back in 1979. But now a lot of agencies can use crime mapping and incidents, and you can start to do database searches, and you can put in different keyword searches, different items used, that sort of thing. And you start to connect the dots. So I don't know. I just, that would be one of those that, like you said, piques the interest. Like,
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Excuse me. Like I said, Brian did call one of the agencies that handled the case earlier, and just spoke with them. He's going to be giving us a call back and just kind of speaking. I think he said he was 12 or something when it happened. He's a younger guy or something. He's like, I know of it. I don't know a lot to tell you. So we'll see what we can get from him. I am curious to see if we can get any information that's not currently open source. That's not, the case is considered, we don't really know. It's not being worked. I think that once Travis was acquitted and then at least found guilty in the civil suit of a wrongful death, it sounds like that's just kind of where things were left lying. Mm-hmm. So there's a shot that we could maybe get a little bit more information than is out there if it's not being looked at as an open investigated case right now. Mm-hmm. And so we did reach out and I had a brief, it was actually right before the show started, brief conversation with Kathy's son, who is obviously grown now, has his own family. And so just kind of reaching out to talk to her family a little bit. I do hate how kind of, I say underreported. And I mean, I guess maybe it didn't seem like it at the time, but it's just so tragic and horrible to not, I just don't feel like it's resolved. And so I think that that's why it feels tough that it's not really well known.
Well, and that's what I was saying about like the not guilty, mm-hmm. when someone is charged with murder and then they're found not guilty, obviously family members, friends, the community, everyone kind of decides, oh, well, he is still guilty or no, he wasn't.
Right.
And in this one, like we've talked about, it's tough because it sounds like just from what we've read, it all kind of came down to just DNA, and the age of the offender and the way the crime, if what we're being told is accurate, because we're reading it basically third party, and that's one of those things too that it's tough, and I hate the idea. One, like I said, if the wrong person is charged with murder or that person did commit the murder, were found not guilty, right, and now the community and family is still like
frustrated.
Frustrated.
Yeah, it's tough, and it's tough too that now he's dead, so it's not like there's a lot of going back to figure things out.
And this is one too where if this were in maybe the last 10 years, 12 years, that sort of thing, jail phone calls are recorded in most jurisdictions. So when someone's charged, especially with like murder, and they get processed at a jail and they get on the phone and start talking, a lot of information comes out in jail phone calls. And I know people are listening to this and going, why are you saying that? inmates are, every time they pick up a phone, it says this is a recorded line by whatever facility it is. So it's not like that it's a trick or anything, and that the inmates don't know. They all know that the conversations are being recorded. But oftentimes they got to get information out there, or they start to talk and may say something in a jail phone call that only the killer would know. And we don't.
I will say, and again, I know it sounds like I'm just pointing toward his innocence, and I'm not necessarily even doing that. I guess just as my brain's working through it, I do find it also a little more unlikely that if at 16 years old he did this, that he didn't say anything to anybody in the next 30 years. At 16, there was no like pubic hair found. There was no. I just can't imagine that he would have been so strict in keeping things together and clean in that way. But maybe he did. I just don't know.
Well, that will go back to his personality. Like if he's a 16-year-old kid with a messy room and people who were friends with him who say, oh, well, he was a slob and he was always, disorganized. Well, okay, well, then maybe that's not going
to fly.
Yeah. And an interview like that would be interesting too, just to see how he does react and how, and at 16 is tough because 16-year-olds, I mean, and we know now from years and years of studying interviews and people falsely confessing or teenagers saying, I said it to get them to stop talking to me kind of thing. They don't think long term. But it would be interesting to know what his reaction was when they said you are being charged with murder. Because I can tell you, guilty people react a very similar way. And it's usually that they don't argue, they don't protest against it. It's almost a look like sometimes a smirk, like, all right, you got me. Or sometimes it is like, oh no, like, but it's often not, you're crazy. I didn't do this. We got to clear my name. And really good interview techniques allow the person to clear everything. Every bit of evidence you go over and they can explain it away, or they can't. And then they kind of realize that they're done.
Right. Well, I think we've covered our bases, you think?
Yeah. That's terrible.
It is terrible. But I do hope that, I don't know, we can figure something out. I don't mean we're going to sit here and solve something. I just mean I hope we can get some more information that's just not available.
Yeah, I would like to know more, just in general about that. Like if, and I know that they can only say what they can say, but if there's an additional bit of information or part of the investigation that's ongoing since he was found not guilty, I don't know.
Well, okay, guys, thanks for hanging in there with us. We were rambling on, I feel like, there for a while. But we'll be wrapping it up soon. Do you have anything you want to tell everybody? That sounded like you have something you want to tell everybody. I don't know.
I don't. I did post an episode recently.
Tell me about that.
Yeah, so on the other show, the Disruptors podcast with BC and Ski, when I first started the show, I made a list of guests that I really wanted to get on there. And there's a guy, Michael McCulligan, who's lead singer of Dropkick Murphys for their first album. And then he left, became a Boston firefighter. Prior to being Dropkick Murphys, he was in the Army. After he was Boston firefighter, he formed a band called Street Dogs. They had like 5, 6, 7 albums. Just a great, great guy. And I finally got to do an episode with him. And I enjoyed it thoroughly.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean,
it was a fun episode. It was really, it was meaningful, but it was lighthearted and fun. And he's a good storyteller. And
I'd love to do another one, down the road. They've got some shows they're playing and actually selling out some crowds and traveling and stuff. So anybody who's a fan of Dropkick Murphys, or if they've heard of Street Dogs, go check them out. But it was a good episode. He talks about sobriety and that sort of thing. Yeah, I was excited about it, but that's about it.
Okay. Well, I don't have anything. I did get a notification that some new stickers and magnets are coming in, and I'm really excited about these guys. And I had to send a couple of apology messages because those of you that ordered stickers, I sent some of them out, and then like the others fell through the seat of my car, whatever. They're still in my car. They will be coming to you. And those of you that haven't gotten them yet, I'm just not going to charge you because it's been so long. Just I'm not gonna. But anyway, so we'll be sending those out, and hoping to get some more merch out pretty soon.
It'd be good.
That's all I got.
all.
I gotta quit talking because I can't. I'm coughing every time I talk. It's fine, but it's got to be obnoxious to hear. All right, guys. Well, we really appreciate you. And again, you can find all of this stuff on Night Shift with Andrea Uplate on Instagram, or just Andrea Uplate, and then same name of the YouTube channel. If you listen on iTunes or Spotify, it'll drop in the next couple of days. And go follow Brian if you have not already. It's The Disruptors with Brian Sanders. Right?
Yeah,
Isn't that
and
what
the Disruptors podcast.
Okay, and then the Disruptors podcast. That's the one I'm thinking about. Since you changed it up, I'm getting I'm
it's
getting
like
them backwards.
_Disruptors_podcast.
Gotcha. So follow him on those. Also go subscribe to his YouTube channel as well. Try to remember to like, rate, review, all those annoying things I ask you to do because I always forget. I don't like. Yeah. All right. Well, we love y'all and we appreciate you listening. And so I guess until next time, we will see y'all next Tuesday. You can tell them good night.
Good night.
Good night, y'all.
I wasn't trying to be rude.
We're not done yet.
Oh, sorry.